Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, what I wanted to do is take a look at what builds and what Ascendancies have been performing really well at the start of Path of Exile 2, and also which ones, such as my own choice, have not been reaching expectations. I'm going to do this by taking a look at data. Let's get into the details of that, but just firstly, I'm going to be focusing upon trade-enabled softcore play. Softcore solo self-found is going to come later, and hardcore is something that's really up in the air, and I feel like individual play skill matters more than build power at the moment. And particularly in hardcore, individual knowledge of what's coming matters more. There has been an absolute slaughterhouse of players for a particular boss in Act 2, not one that's particularly hard in softcore, but one that has a gimmick to it that's entirely not obvious. And as a result, I don't feel that the hardcore meta has settled out very much yet. Of course, that's going to change over time once people learn the basics, and there'll be a lot of insights to be gained by looking at hardcore in the future, but for now, it's softcore trade enabled we're going to be looking at. Now, our methodology is pretty simple. Grinding Games publish a ladder. This is a list of the highest players by experience points. Now, in Path of Exile 1, there's a lot more information to be gleaned there. It lists the top 15,000 characters by XP. This is then scraped by the website POE.ninja. And additionally, there are links to their player profiles unless those players opt out. And that means that POE Ninja can scrape a whole bunch of extra information as well. In POE 2, though, there's a lot less information available. It's just 1,000 people on the ladder, not 15,000, and it also contains much less information about each build. In fact, all you can tell is their ascendancy. And at the moment, there's no equivalent of POE.ninja either, but there's still plenty of information to be gleaned from it, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. Now, special weighting is going to be given to level 82 players. At the time that I took the snapshot of the ladder for this video, I decided I was going to take everyone that was in position 50 and above, but position 50 was a massive multi-way tie for level 82, and so I ended up extending it to the top 72 players. This is everyone that had reached level 82 at the time that my cutoff was taken. We also need to normalize a bit though for pre-league hype. If a build has done really well, but everyone knew it was going to do well going into it, then that means a little bit less than if it's done really well and not many people were playing it because people thought it was going to be dumpster tier. Cough cough the Deadeye. Almost no one was interested in playing this Ascendancy prior to the league launch, and now it is an emphatic #1 on absolute performance and even further ahead when it comes to performance relative to expectations. Remember, the more people that play an Ascendancy, the more likely it is to be pushed up the ladder just by sheer force of interest, and Deadeye had less interest, but it's still an overwhelming #1 top setup at the moment. Now, one major drawback to PoE 2 versions of this video, there's simply no information available yet on what these builds look like. How popular is the unique item Wanderlust? In PoE 1, we'd know. We'd be able to say, okay, of this 1,000 people at the top of the ladder, exactly 18 of them are equipping Wanderlust in their boot slot. That's not the case at the moment. We can't tell any of that information at all. And what's really important here is that we can't tell apart really obscure versions of a build that might be hard to think of. For instance, we can't tell apart whether a Deadeye on this list is playing a standard bow build that you might expect the Deadeye to play, or whether they've decided to go all in on making some sort of niche spell build. There are plenty of spell Deadeyes in Path of Exile 1, they'll probably exist in Path of Exile 2 as well, and we can't tell from the ladder as yet what type of setup these Deadeyes are using. I do think they're probably all bow builds, because the ones that I've looked at have been playing bows, but it is just a very important caveat. We just don't know that from the data alone. I want to also add in what low performing means. So sometimes Ascendancies do badly because they're bad, but sometimes there is tech that will make them good, but it hasn't yet been discovered, or it's been discovered but it hasn't yet been popularized. For instance, a particular unique item might rocket a build from F tier all the way up into S tier once people work out how to use it on a particular build, and once that information flows through the entire Path of Exile player base, which can sometimes take a while. For instance, in Path of Exile 1 at the moment, the unique sword Ephemeral Edge is something that is causing the Trickster Ascendancy to overperform even more than it otherwise would. And this is not something that every individual person that's thinking of playing a build in PoE 1 would necessarily think of, but once that information spreads throughout the PoE community, lots of people make their own unique takes on that setup, Ephemeral Edge Trickster, and also they try different things, some of them work better, and you get a bit more optimization taking place as well. What low performing does mean though, is that the obvious intuitive ways to build a character are not performing very well, and that's important to keep in mind. Anything that's good in this Ascendancy is something that's not entirely obvious. I'll give a quick PoE 1 example of this dynamic. By the end of the Sanctum League, pretty much everyone considered Hexblast Mines to be a god tier League starter build. But on day one, it was only a small group of Korean players that worked out just how good this setup was. Their version was not yet perfected. It was solid, but it wasn't spectacular. Their version was developing, and as it developed, it started getting better. It came to the attention of more and more build makers, and then at that point, people realized, hey, they've built in a life stacking dynamic here. This isn't needed for the build to shine. What if we were to simplify this build, remove the life stacking components of it, and then come up with something else entirely? That's exactly what happened, and then we ended up with a fantastic version of Hexblast Mines that started absolutely dominating every event after Sanctum League, became one of the best League starters around in that game. So in PoE 2, there's undoubtedly a whole lot of things like this to be discovered. They haven't been discovered yet, they will be, and this meta would continue to evolve even if Grinding Gear Games made no balance changes, and even if there were no additional Ascendancies added. Of course, we know balance changes and new Ascendancies are both coming. Let's talk quickly about pre-launch hype though. Something I'm going to be doing in this is normalizing the final tier level for the amount of pre-launch hype that existed. There's a very important reason for this, and this is just that getting a number of people into the top 1,000 means more if less people are playing the build. The best information we've got as to how many people are playing a particular Ascendancy is just estimating from the amount of pre-launch hype that existed. It's a bit subjective, but I'm going to estimate the pre-launch hype as follows. In S tier, we had Invoker. This seemed to be the most exciting build to the most people. In A tier, we had Blood Mage, Infernalist, and Stormweaver. In B tier, we had the Titan, Gemling Legionnaire, Witchhunter, and Chronomancer. C tier, we had Deadeye and Warbringer. And down in F tier, we had Acolyte of Chayula and Pathfinder. This is just the amount of hype that existed prior to the launch of the game. Of course, this all changes once we start looking at their performance. Okay, so starting us off, we have the Titan. Pre-launch, I'm going to measure the hype at this about B tier. Its ladder performance has also been B tier. 66 of the top 1,000 players, one of the top 72, the people who reached level 82 plus at the time that I started writing this video. This has been living up to, but not exceeding, its pretty modest pre-launch hype. I'm going to say that this is doing okay at the moment and put it in a B tier overall. You can't go wrong with the Titan, but it's also not tearing up the meta the way that a certain Ascendancy, we'll get to in a second, has been. The Warbringer comes in next, and pre-launch, this has been hyped to a level of C tier or so a bit less than average. Ladder performance has been more like D tier. It's underperformed expectations, but not by a crushing amount. 12 of the top 1,000 and one single level 82 plus. But it is worth noting that this person is in the top 20 of the player base overall, hitting at level 84, sitting in 20th place. They were level 84 at the time that I captured my data for this video. So the Warbringer is slightly underperforming the modest expectations people had of it pre-launch. Overall, I'm going to put this Ascendancy in C tier, but watch this space because I feel there's a bit of potential here. The fact that someone's got a top 20 performance with this class means there's possibly some tech that's just not widely known at the moment. Maybe that person's had a unique item drop for them that's made it a lot better, and once that unique item is more widely available in circulation, then they'll be in a better place for that information to spread through the player base, and more people will have success with this Ascendancy. I feel this has a lot more potential to start to break out a little bit once people understand more about the game. Deadeye comes next, and oh my god, is this one at the top. Pre-launch, I think the hype level was somewhere around C tier. Ladder performance though, unquestionable S tier performance, eclipsing everything else. 27, or more than a third, of the level 82 plus players are playing a Deadeye. This is an utterly dominant performance coming from a complete underdog. This would be the equivalent of a completely unknown, off-the-radar tennis player coming up at age 19. No one's got any expectations of them. Then in that year, they manage to go and win the Australian Open, and they win Wimbledon as well. It's that level of performance. Deadeye is in S plus tier. There is no way you're going to go wrong if you decide to follow the herd and play a Deadeye. Pathfinder comes next, and pre-launch this was one of the least hyped Ascendancies of all. It's something that's also in Path of Exile 1, that definitely went against it, but it's also something that people just weren't that excited by. However, it's slightly overperformed those very low expectations. I think that's worth mentioning, and in fact, because it's overperformed them by so much, even though its performance isn't stellar, I'm going to end up putting it in A tier overall. So its ladder performance has been C tier. 21 of the top 1,000 players, but 3 of them have been level 82 plus. When you start thinking about this, it's got 2% of the top 1,000, but then it's also got a larger percentage when you restrict to that top 72. you start looking at more like 4 and a bit percent. That's a good sign. This is a build that very few people have been playing, but the people that have been playing it have been having disproportionate success. So consider Pathfinder if you want something that's a little bit more off meta than the Deadeye is sure to be. Chronomancer comes in next, and here we're going for something that had lots of pre-launch hype and hasn't really lived up to it. So pre-launch, I estimated Chronomancer excitement levels to be around B tier. Ladder performance so far, F tier unfortunately. 7 of the top 1,000, although one of them has made it to level 82+. This makes Chronomancer the highest performing of the 3 that I'm going to say their ladder performance is F tier. Given that there was a fair bit of hype around this one, I'm going to put it in F tier as an overall package once we take in both its ladder performance and its pre-launch hype, because it's significantly underperforming expectations. Lots of people started this Ascendancy, but few of them have made it to endgame. That's a bad spot to be. Stormweaver comes in next, and pre-launch hype was A tier, but the ladder performance has lived up to this. So we've seen 131 of the top 1,000 people have been Stormweavers, 11 of them are 82+. Overall, I'm going to put this in A- or B+ tier. I kind of want to put it in both of them at the same time. The high expectations the player base had of this Ascendancy have been met, but they haven't really been exceeded. People are doing well with the Stormweaver. It's definitely something you can't go wrong with, but it's also not something that is explosively better than people were expecting, like the Deadeye. Witchhunter comes next. B tier for pre-launch hype, B tier performance. 80 of the top 1,000, 6 of them are 82+. Overall, this is neither exceeding nor underperforming expectations, perfectly balanced as all things should be, and I'm going to sit it in B tier as my overall thoughts on it. Gemling Legionnaire is next. Pre-launch hype, we're looking at a B tier. Ladder performance though, a little bit worse. This is in C tier, but it's C tier with a major caveat. And that is that whilst it's only 1.8% of the top 1,000 players, it is a massive 4 people out of 72, or 5.5% of the top 72 players. That's something that's interesting. So there's a small section of the Gemling Legionnaires that are pulled miles ahead and that are overperforming everyone else that's made it to endgame. Maybe it's the case that the Gemling Legionnaire just does really well once you're in maps, and that's something to consider if you're thinking of something to play. Hard to get through the campaign, really good afterwards. Or alternately, maybe there's something else. Maybe there's some build tech that people have discovered that hasn't yet percolated through the player base. I'm going to rate this as a C tier. The obvious ways to build this seem to be underperforming expectations by quite a bit, but there are people doing extremely well with this Ascendancy, and I'm going to say watch this space. There'll be improvements when it comes to the Gemling Legionnaire. Power is there, but it's just a bit hard to find. The Invoker comes in next. Pre-launch, my hype levels for this I think were around the S tier. This was being the most talked about Ascendancy as far as I could see online. Ladder performance, it's doing fine. It's in B+ tier. 80 of the top 1,000, 10 of them have hit level 82+, and interestingly, 3 of the top 10 players at the time that I took my snapshot of the ladder. Overall, I'm going to rate this as a C+. It's performing adequately, but it is not meeting its expectations. It's doing fine, but there's probably more to discover in order to make it truly into a strong setup. And then, unfortunately, we need to look at the lowest performer of all, the Acolyte of Chayula. Pre-launch hype on this was F tier. People looked at this and thought, yeah, this is bad. Ladder performance is F tier. This is the worst. There are 4 people in the top 1,000 that are playing this Ascendancy. None of them have reached level 82+. The highest level reached is level 80. Overall, I'm going to put this in F tier as an overall Ascendancy. And then we have, unfortunately, the one that I'm playing. Pre-launch hype, the Blood Mage was around about A tier. It was one of the more talked about Ascendancies, but the ladder performance I'm going to have to call an F tier. 10 of the top 1,000 people are playing this Ascendancy. None of them are 82+. None of them has even hit level 80. At the time I was recording this, the highest was 79. Overall, this is going to be an F tier, and it's a more emphatic F than the Acolyte of Chayula is. Blood Mage has undergone more testing, and people haven't solved it. There's a bunch of different ways people have been trying this. I was trying it with a tri-element approach. There's other people who have been trying it with a chaos damage approach, a physical damage approach, and no one's really found a breakout solution yet. I'm playing this myself, and while it's been fun, Sangomancy's drawback is worse than we thought in a world where you might need to dump 5,000 or 6,000 mana into killing a boss. So you're not just dumping 5,000 or 6,000 mana over the space of a long fight, you're also dumping 5,000 or 6,000 life over the space of that fight. This is kind of like going into the boss with 7 less life flask charges than you'd otherwise have. And when you think of it that way, that's pretty severe. It means that you just don't have the space to make mistakes against bosses. That's the real problem with Blood Mage, and that's the reason that people aren't yet finding much success with it. I'm going to keep playing it because I am enjoying the Ascendancy, but there's a reason that I haven't finished the campaign yet. Now let's jump over to the Infernalist, the second best performer, and one of the things that was being hyped quite a bit pre-launch. So A tier pre-launch, A plus tier in terms of its ladder performance. 238 of the top 1,000, 8 of them are level 82 plus. Now I would have called this S tier with this performance based on having 238 of the top 1,000. Yeah, it's not as good as Deadeye, but it's doing pretty well. The thing is though, that the number of people that are then making it into that top 72, the number that have made it to level 82 is quite a bit lower. And as a result, I'm concerned that there might be some issues the Infernalist has early in maps. So progresses very well through the campaign, and then starts to hit a little bit of a power brick wall possibly. For that reason, I'm only going to put this in A tier overall and A plus tier on ladder performance, even though from the numbers alone, you might consider it S tier for ladder performance and A plus overall. It's solidly overperforming from high expectations, but people might be just struggling a bit once they get further into endgame. Anyways, my final thought, play what looks fun, but if you're in doubt and you're just about to get started, play the Deadeye. It seems to be doing really, really well. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.